Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host, Gershwin, and you are watching One Mind Syndicate. Today we continue talking about Guilliman as we get into Guilliman versus Magnus. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K content every single day. And of course, if you have any suggestions, just comment down below. Important to note that this is the conclusion to the Terran Crusade. If you don't know what the Terran Crusade is, check out the 40 Facts on that first. Or the title might be Guilliman's Journey to Terra, or How Guilliman Got to Terra. The thumbnail might say something like that. So check that out if you want to learn a little bit of the backstory. If you just want to check out the fight between Guilliman and Magnus the Red, then let's get into it. Let's get into 40 facts on Magnus versus Guilliman. Guilliman stepped through the shimmering lights of the Webway Gate, enduring the unsettling doubling of reality that it created. He passed from soft illumination into harsh black shadow and searing glare, from air and gentle warmth into the frozen, airless lethality of near vacuum. Gravity bled away around him, and with a single step, Guilliman launched himself away from the Webway Gate into a billowing moon dust beyond. The Terran Crusade had emerged into a deep crater, much of which was immersed in inky blackness. Shafts of stark illumination fell from above, where the rays of Sol itself spilled over the lip of the deep pit. Conscious of the foes following close at their heels, the Loyalists climbed quickly up the pit's sides. Space Marines sprang upward, hand over fist in the low gravity, only 1/16 that of Terra. Tanks threw up drifting fans of moon dust as they powered up the rocky slope. Skitarii marched relentlessly upward, ignoring their blackening and freezing organic components. These latter soldiers would not last long on the lunar surface, but they would endure long enough to serve the Omnissiah's needs. Above them, Celestine soared upward into the dark skies. Her Gemini Superior had donned their helms, but the Living Saint had no need for such apparel. Behind them, Veilwalker and her Harlequins lingered by the Webway Gate. The Shadowseer gathered her powers, leveling her staff towards the Webway portal and beginning a whispering chant. The runes upon the structure's flanks glowed fiercely with a searing light. Before Veilwalker could finish her ritual, the gate pulsed with dark energies. Blue fire billowed, its roar sounding as a dull rumble in the airless conditions. Veilwalker span clear at the last moment, but many of her Harlequin followers were not so fortunate. Their bodies were engulfed in flames, and their suits burned away, so their bodies melted like frozen wax. From near the lip of the crater, Guilliman looked back to see the corrupted Webway Gate glowing with dark fire. Streamers of energy leapt and coiled, dancing around the walls of the pit and blasting the Eldar corpses to ash. Out from the crackling storm stepped the first Rubric Marine, their footfalls muffled as they advanced across the crater floor. They raised their bolters and opened fire, cursed shells roaring up from below to slam into the Imperials. Armor ruptured and souls burned. Bulky bodies in the colors of the Nova Marines and Mortificators tumbled in slow motion down the slopes, clouds of chalky dust cascading around them. A dreadnought toppled backwards, its pilot slain. The remaining Loyalists kept moving over the lip of the crater and out of the Thousand Suns line of fire. Here the retreat stopped at last. Guilliman and his surviving followers stood upon the surface of Luna itself, near the heart of Mare Tempestus. On every side loomed the rusted hulks of old and broken Imperial void ships, a graveyard of junked and decommissioned spacecraft left there to molder. Overhead, the blackness of space was speckled with stars, while closer to hand, huge orbital docks and defense platforms filled the sky. Gothic Leviathans swarming with voidcraft and covering in glaring lights. The grandeur of Luna's dock still faded against the breathtaking sight of Terra itself, hanging stark against the blackness above. There was the destination that Guilliman sought, the end of his journey at last. Yet a deadly foe still chased at the Primarch's heels, and could not be allowed to work his malefic will within sight of the throne world. Guilliman knew that the warp phenomena currently erupting in the crater's depths would surely have triggered every alarm and emergency auger within a dozen Terran souls. It would not be long before overwhelming Imperial force raced to investigate, but there was no telling what irrevocable havoc Magnus could cause before they arrived. Guilliman saw again the visions that Kairos had sent him, of a shattered world crashing down upon a fire-blackened Terra, and shuddered. He and his followers must hold the enemies here, driving the Thousand Suns back, or at least keeping them suppressed until aid could arrive. The Thousand Suns were spilling from the Webway Gate in increasing numbers, scarab occults and rubricae driven forward by chaos sorcerers on their flying discs. Their advance was steady but unstoppable, pushing up the crater walls with their guns blazing, recognizing that the crater itself offered the best chance of containing the foe. Guilliman spread his warriors, combat walkers, and tanks around its lip, and commanded them to pour fire down into the advancing Thousand Suns. Space Marines, Skitarii, Dreadnoughts, Land Raiders, Vindicators, Dune Crawlers, Cataphren Battle Servitors, and more opened fire, using the lip of the crater for cover and making the most of the higher ground. The Loyalists sent volley after volley, ripping down into the heretic Astartes. Striding automatons were knocked back into the crater by devastating explosions. Glittering dust drifted from the rents in ancient ornate armor, floating free in the low gravity and leaving once animated undead warriors to crumble and collapse. Sergeants barked order through the Vox, coordinating volleys of las cannon blast and demolisher shells to rain down upon the rubricae. Cypher and his shadowy companions rained fire down upon the Thousand Suns. Greyfax slammed silver stakes through one rubricae after another from the condom door bolter. Voldus tore traitors apart with the potent powers of his mind. Armored corpses piled in heaps at the bottom of the crater, surrounding the Webway Gate with carrion remains. From cracks and rocky outcroppings around the crater's edge, the last of the Harlequins added their own fire. Hails of monofilament discs cutting through power armor and the flesh of living demonic discs. For a moment, it appeared as though the Thousand Suns would be bottled up in the crater. Though their return fire caused slow attrition amongst the Loyalists, the traitors were losing far more warriors than they slew. Then a fresh pulse of dark power surged through the Webway Gate, its energies whirling faster and faster until they formed a flaming vortex. A wave of supernatural dread swept over the Loyalist Space Marines as a huge, horn-headed figure stepped through onto the surface of Luna. Spreading his wings wide, Magnus the Red looked at Guilliman with a mocking smile. Drawing himself up to his full height, Magnus the raised his glaives and spoke words of power that rang out in defiance of all natural law. Purple flames leapt, forming shimmering shields and warding the Thousand Suns from harm. Suddenly, the rubricae and the scarab occult could advance unharmed, striding upward as their foes' shots exploded upon Magnus's psychic shields. The Thousand Suns suffered no such obstructions, and dozens of Loyalists were sent tumbling back from the crater's lip, blood and shattered bones spraying. Seeing the sudden shift in the situation, and knowing that they must hold out no matter the cost, Guilliman ordered his surviving warriors back. Moments later, the first ranks of the rubricae crested the lip of the crater and strode out, with their gun muzzles flaring. More Thousand Suns marched behind them, and the surviving Loyalists fell back to void shipwrecks and rocky craters to gain cover, while their tanks backed steadily away with their guns thundering. Magnus rose from the crater. With a word, the Demon Primarch unmade a trio of Dreadknights, burning out their psychic wards and crushing their armor. With a gesture, he telekinetically plucked an Ultramarine Land Raider from the ground and slammed it through the ranks of the Skitarii like a cannonball. Magnus brandished his staff, and reality rent apart, a tide of demons boiling from the warp to join the battle. Recognizing that the Demon Primarch would swiftly destroy his army if allowed free rein, Guilliman broke into a headlong charge. Giving vent to a booming war cry, the Primarch of the Ultramarines smashed a path through the rubricae before him and launched himself into a heroic leap from the lip of the crater. Guilliman soared, burning blade leaving a trail of flame behind him. Magnus saw his brother coming and began an incantation of pain, but before he could finish it, the Lord of Ultramar struck. Magnus managed to parry his brother's arcing blade with his glaive, but the battering ram impact of Guilliman's leap carried the Crimson King backward, away from the fight. The two Primarchs tumbled across the lunar surface, dust billowing around them, and smashed into the rusted wrecks of an Imperial frigate. Slabs of metal and ironwork crashed down around them, burying the fighting brothers in an avalanche of wreckage. Meanwhile, the battle around the crater raged on, the last remnant of the Terran Crusade fighting furiously to survive. Guilliman fought his way to freedom, hurtling aside a slab of rusted metal and ignoring the alarms ringing within his helm. His armor was compromised, its air supply venting and the cold of the void leaking in. Were it not for his godlike constitution and Call's life-sustaining technology, Guilliman would likely have been dead. Instead, he raised his blade and kicked his way clear of the scattered wreckage. "Magnus," he shouted through his Vox grill, searching around him. The Primarch knew his dubious gifted brother could hear his words, even in the void of space. "I know better than to think you dead. Face me." Deep laughter rolled around Guilliman as he watched Magnus's ethereal form rise from the wreckage and drifted down to loom over him. The Demon Primarch solidified once more, huge and menacing. "Very well, Reboot," laughed Magnus as his words conjured crystalline showers that rained down upon the pale ground. "Here I am in the flesh, and somehow there are you." Magnus cocked his head to one side and smirked. "I don't remember you seeming so insignificant." 10 millennia have made you no less arrogant then?" asked Guilliman, warily circling his towering foe. Inside his helm, a look of disgust twisted his Partesian features as he regarded the monstrous form of the Crimson King. "Certainly, those years have done you no other kindness." Magnus sighed. "How you can have such grand plans and yet such a scant vision has always eluded me." "This," the Demon Primarch said, warp energies stirring as they gathered around his leveled glaive, "is what true power looks like." "I see no power here," said Guilliman, shaking his head in dismay. "I see corruption and enslavement to monsters that are worshipped as gods." "On that, Guilliman," Magnus laughed, sparing a glance at the loyalists fighting nearby, "perhaps we can finally agree." The Cyclopean sorcerer's smile turned into a sneer when he noticed his brother glance to the skies above. "Hoping to keep my sons and I occupied until the remnants of this Imperium come save you? I may not reach our father's throne room today, but I promise you that you won't either. You will be dead long before help arrives. That alone will be worth all this trouble." With that, Magnus attacked. The giant moved far faster than even Guilliman could have believed, his ensourced glaive lashing out to split the Lord of Ultramar in two. Guilliman leapt backwards, pulling his midriff in as he did so. Magnus's weapon drew sparks from his armor as it whistled past, and Guilliman landed atop a crumbled prow of a nearby frigate. Before he could take stock, Magnus was hurling balls of blue psychic flame at him. Guilliman threw himself out of their path, sliding down the prow's rusted flank and dropping into a crouch at its feet. He broke into a charge, bursting from the drifting clouds of dust raised by his landing, and weaving skillfully around his brother's sorcerer's projectiles. The ammunition in the hand of Dominion was spent, but it was still a phenomenally powerful weapon. Sidestepping a downward cut from Magnus's glaive, Guilliman slid inside his brother's guard and delivered a thunderous uppercut. The impact lifted Magnus from his feet and sent him tumbling upward into the inky blackness. Fiery blood drifted in strings from Magnus's shattered jaw, causing fungi to sprout from where it spattered on the lunar surface. The power of change embedded even in the Demon Primarch's blood. Roiling psychic energies wrapped around Magnus, arresting his motion and rightening him as he howled angrily. The Demon Primarch stared hatefully down his single eye, and Guilliman knew fresh sorrow as he realized how truly mad and lost his sibling had become. "Arrogance," shouted Guilliman. "It was always your undoing, brother. You thought this would be an easy fight, that the gifts of your so-called gods would render me impotent. Perhaps those you serve are not all you believe them to be. Magnus's rage vanished in the blink of an eye, and he laughed scornfully in response to Guilliman's jive. You would like to believe that, wouldn't you? That the dutiful Rubut Guilliman was justified in his loyalty. That now the ramifications of our choices have become clear. You can now look down on me as you always did. With sudden violence, Magnus jabbed downward with his glaive. Multicolored flames exploded from its blade, engulfing Guilliman and the bedrock upon which he stood. Moon dust exploded upward in the crackling cloud. Fire danced across the scrap iron, and Guilliman cried out as agony racked his body. Crackling with raw power, Magnus descended still, pouring warp fire into his brother. Guilliman screamed again, dropping to one knee as his armor blazed with searing energy. Sparks burst from the overloaded system of his power armor, and the smell of his own cooking flesh filled his nostrils. Desperate, Guilliman drove himself backwards in a graceless leap. He flew in an arc to smash down amidst a tumbled heap of debris, armor still flickering with flame. Magnus landed, chuckling cruelly. Sprawled amidst the tangles of wreckage, Guilliman tried to push himself to his feet. The Primarch's body was a mass of pain, and his armor responded sluggishly. A number of its servo motors burned out. No, brother, said Magnus. You stay where you are. The demon Primarch gestured, and spectral claws tore several hundred tons of machinery loose from a nearby wreckage. Guilliman had time to brace himself before the mass impacted like a comet, burying him completely beneath an avalanche of crashing metal. Guilliman was entombed. Alarms chimed in his ears, red warning signs flashing in his peripheral vision. The pain of lacerated organs and shattered bones dragged at him, and for a moment the Lord of Ultramar was tempted simply to give in. Then he thought again of his long-suffering sons, fighting so hard for the ideals of an Imperium that they had never even known. He would not betray them. He would not let one of his deranged brothers keep him from his responsibilities. Not again. Muscles tensing, strength surging, Guilliman ripped his way up through the tumbled mountains of wreckage. He roared as he hurled aside a capacitor unit the size of a Land Raider, and stepped bloodied but unbroken into the hard light of Luna. Magnus arched an eyebrow at the sight, and braced his glaive to hurl another spell. And then the void lit with fire. Grand Master Voldus looked up and gave thanks as the Emperor's deliverance rained down upon the battlefield. At this point, the Terran Crusade forces had broken into small islands of resistance. Some hunkered down amid spacecraft wreckage, others crouching behind jutting lunar rocks. The Thousand Suns had surrounded them, relentlessly pouring fire into the Loyalist positions, while demons hurled overhead on golden discs to rain warp flame upon them. Now, though, help had arrived. Guilt-chased fighter craft screamed down over the lunar landscape. As they did so, rippling lines of fire exploded amidst rubricae and horrors alike. Lasblast and hails of explosive shells tore the Zinchian foot soldiers apart. Bombs fell amongst them, sundering armor and flesh. At the same time, vast leviathans of adamantium and plasteel rumbled in overhead. Naval system monitors of the Imperial Navy's Terran Defense Fleet hovered in low orbit, their enormous forms swamping the battlefield in shadow as they came. Aided by the triangulatory targeting data transmitted by Archmagos Belisarius' call, the void ship rained pinpoint-accurate fire upon the foe. Lunar dust whirled in sudden vortices as teleported energy snatched it up. Bright light flared, and the golden giants of the Adeptus Custodes stepped from it with giant guardian spears leveled. Hails of bolter fire ripped into the rubricae. Cursing, the sorcerers ordered their undead golem warriors to turn and address their new foes, but to no avail. Moving with breathtaking speed and skill, the custodians hacked their way into the heretic Astartes. Each fought like a hero born, their blades splitting ancient power armor like firewood and sending empty helms spinning lazily away across the lunar surface. Rallying as aid appeared, the last enclaves of those warriors who had set out for Macragge fought back with renewed fury. Voldus stepped out from the wreckage of a bulk carrier, leading his remaining Grey Knights and Dread Knights in a valiant charge. His hammer smashed apart ceramite wherever it connected, and the psychic lightning danced about him, despite the Chaos Sorcerer's best effort to banish it. Inquisitor Greyfax fought alongside him, her iron will bringing Tzeentchian conjurers to their knees before she struck off their heads with her masterwork blade. Seizing the moment, Saint Celestine swept through the enemy ranks, the ardent blade slashing left and right as her Gemini Superior wrecked the demons with bolter fire. Captain Cato Sicarius followed in her wake, rallying Ultramarines and their progenitors behind him as they cut a path toward the Adeptus Custodes. The muffled boom of engines sounded overhead, heralding the arrival of further Imperial forces. Stark yellow drop pods slammed down, thrusters flaring. Their hatches open and squads of Imperial Fist Space Marines emerged from within, bolters blazing at the enemy. Gunships rumbled overhead, yellow-hulled Storm Ravens and Storm Talons, whose weapons tore through the thousand suns. Several were swatted away by bolts of sorcery and hails of rotary cannon fire, flames belching from ruptured hulls as they span down to crash amidst the wreckage of starships. Amongst these crafts flew a trio of Valkyries with hulls of crimson and black, the sigil of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica emblazoned upon their flanks. Purple fire speared upward, ripping the wings from the leading craft and sending it rolling to a halt in a blazing fireball. The other two swept on toward their quarry, and as they came in low, their side doors slid open. While their brave pilots blitzed fire at Magnus the Red, two squads of Helm's Sisters of Silence dropped from the gunships. They landed near Guilliman in fighting crouches. Angrily, Magnus swept his clawed hand through the air, dragging one gunship sideways with telekinetic power and smashing it into the other. Both Valkyries exploded and tumbled downward, but the Sisters of Silence slept nimbly aside. Magnus glowered, jabbing with his glaives and sending tendrils of green and yellow psychic flame spiraling in their direction. The sorcery sputtered and died before it reached them, undone by the Empiric dead zone around the warrior knolls. Seeing a strategic advance at last, Guilliman leapt down from the mound of wreckage and landed amidst the Sisters of Silence. They would shield him from his brother's fell powers. Together the Primarch and the Sisters charged toward Magnus, with their blades at the ready. The Demon Primarch hurled another volley of psychic destruction, growling in frustration as it flickered out like the first. Angrily, Magnus hefted his glaive and swooped forward to meet his enemies at close quarters. If he could not destroy them with the powers of the warp, he would hack and crush their mortal bodies until nothing remained but meat. Beneath the dark lunar sky, with Terra hanging, ancient and hollowed above, the two Primarchs crashed together once again. Veilwalker bound into the air. She drove one foot into the side of Rubrike's helm, ripping it free with the force of her kick. The Shadowseer pushed off from her first victim, spinning through the thin air to hurl a bewildering glamour into the face of a nearby sorcerer. The Tzeentchian worshipper howled in panic, clawing at his helm and ripping it free. His flesh froze in solar seconds, his eyes bursting as bloody puffs and gore squirted from his nose, mouth, and ears. The Shadowseer trilled a mocking laugh as she landed, spinning her stave low to sweep the legs from two more Rubrike, before sketching an elaborate bow to their fellows. Amidst a hail of bolts, Veilwalker sprang away as her kin cartwheeled into the enemy's midst from another direction. In such low gravity conditions, the Harlequins could achieve feats of agility and grace beyond even their normal blinding skill. And Veilwalker laughed again as she saw the Rubrike rendered clumsy by comparison. Bounding in a high pirouette over the battle, Veilwalker sought he who wore the armor of fate. There he was, amidst the wreckage of crude human spacecrafts, battling his monstrous brother alongside a band of warriors. Even from here, the mere presence of the psychic gnolls made Veilwalker shudder. Guilliman and Magnus were trading hate-filled blows, their weapons crashing together with titanic force. The gnolls were doing what they could to aid the fight, stabbing blades at the demon in their midst of pouring bolter fire into him. Already, several lay as broken corpses for their troubles, but the rest were doing an effective job of detonating Magnus's sorcerous powers. Veilwalker landed gracefully, ignoring a storm of magical flames that exploded away to her left. Demons, befuddled by her domino field, cast their spells at where they believed her to be. With a thought, Veilwalker activated the communications inlay in her helm, communing with her death gesture, the Hollow Prince. "The moment has arrived," she said. "Our drama has played out, and the brothers' enmity burns anew." "Now the final curtain, then," whispered the voice of the Hollow Prince, rich with wicked myth. "Indignation, outrage, vendetta." "It must be thus," agreed Veilwalker. "I shall ready the gate for truth this time. You deliver your lines, and let matters play out." Without waiting for an answer, Veilwalker cut her communications. She sprinted for the crater from which they had all emerged. She wove and sprang, dodged and tumbled through the raging battle, finally throwing herself into a feet-first slide over the crater's lip. Veilwalker arched gracefully down, moon dust falling about her like snow, and landed in a crouch amidst a mound of armored corpses. Across the crater floor, the darkness was lit by the whirling storms of purple light that spat from the corrupted webway gate. Magnus had done that, cursing the portal to permit his unnatural passage. Veilwalker smirked coldly behind her mask. He would pay for that hubris. Across the field of battle, she knew that the Hollow Prince would be communicating with Guilliman, explaining their plan to the Primarch. The death gesture would be telling the Primarch that Magnus could be destroyed only by casting his body into the corrupted webway gate. If Veilwalker's visions were correct, Guilliman would believe him. Meanwhile, she had to prepare the gateway, which was currently guarded by a pair of chaos sorcerers. Ghosting closer through the bodies with illusions flickering about her, Veilwalker drew her shuriken pistol, a gentle squeeze of its trigger, a flick of her wrist, and several more gentle depressions. First one sorcerer, then the other staggered as rounds struck them, perfectly placed to puncture their jugular arteries. The two sorcerers crumbled, and Veilwalker hurriedly began her incantations. The energies around the webway gate pulsed and shuddered, their runes on its side glowing brighter as a kneeing vibration shook the dark pit. At that moment, battling demigods appeared above the crater's edge, Guilliman and Magnus both bleeding from the wounds they had dealt one another, still flanked by the last handful of no warriors. Magnus sliced another one of the women in half with a brutal swing of his glaive, which lashed around to hack a chunk from Guilliman's breastplate. In return, the Lord of Ultramar drove Magnus back with a hammer blow from the Emperor's blade, then slammed his shoulder into his brother's chest and sent the Crimson King crashing down the steep slope. Guilliman leapt after him, not giving Magnus a chance to recover. The Primarch's onslaught was punishing, the wounded Guilliman visibly pouring everything he had into his last storm of blows. Veilwalker melted away into the shadows as the warring brothers neared the webway gate, still muttering her incantations and weaving her staff back and forth. Magnus conjured a deadly sphere of warp energies and hurled it at his brother with all of his might. Guilliman's iron halo absorbed the worst of the blast, but still he was sent staggering back. With his back to the gate, the Primarch of the Thousand Suns conjured a wave of telekinetic fury and used it to fling a mass of Space Marine corpses, loyalist and traitor alike, at the last few knolls. They vanished from sight, buried beneath the heap of the dead. The Shadow Seer started forward, fearing for the fate of the final act. Then with a roar of hate and rage, Guilliman struck. The Lord of Ultramar lunged at his brother. The burning blade drove in under the Demon Primarch's guard and sank deep into his chest. Golden flames leapt, and Magnus howled in agony as they chewed hungrily at his flesh. He unleashed his powers in an uncontrolled sorcerer's blast, its shockwaves racing out across the crater and throwing the Shadow Seer from her feet. The burst of power hurled Guilliman onto his back, blade in hand, and sent Magnus staggering free, back through the pulsating webway. Veilwalker had one chance, a single moment in which to alter fate. With a final word, she shattered the runestone that glowed hot in her hand, and severed the webway gate to Luna forever. Power surged. Magnus roared his fury, and then was cut off from Luna. His warriors and his brother banished to the depths of the labyrinthian dimension. Though his plan to strike at the heart of the Imperium of Man in one fell swoop had failed, Magnus the Red always had another scheme in place. With the planet of the sorcerers restored to real space, the Crimson King knew that he would soon have another opportunity to lay low the Imperium that had betrayed him and destroyed all that he loved. And those were 40 facts on Guilliman versus Magnus. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Comment down below, tell me what you think. Did Magnus get gypped again because Guilliman used the Sisters of Silence, the Gnolls that basically cut off his most powerful weapon against any foe? But then again, you could make the argument that Guilliman was also fighting at a disadvantage because he had gone through the entire getting captured by the Red Corsairs, fighting in the webway, fighting once he actually got to Luna. So I guess you can make the argument that Magnus jumped into the fight, hyped, and just, you know, at a 100%. So maybe it evens it out. And also, Guilliman never used any psychic abilities. He was just fighting with his own, sword and his fists. So comment down below. Let me know if you thought that this was a fair fight. Let me know what the outcome would be if there were no Sisters of Silence, and whether they are even needed. Thanks again for watching, guys. And click on the link in the description below, which is going to take you to the wiki page. It has the entire story of the Terran Crusade all in one page, and it has way more information that we did not include in this video, so check that out. But with that said, guys, thanks for watching. This was Gershwin with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.